50 million years ago, something walked into an ocean that sharks had already ruled for hundreds of millions of years. Sharks had been apex predators long before the first trees covered the land, long before insects took flight, and long before anything resembling a whale had entered the sea. Then a small, four-legged mammal began wading into the shallows of a warm coastal sea in what is now Pakistan. It had paws instead of fins, lungs instead of gills, and a body that was not built for life in open water. It was the ancestor of every whale alive today. What happened next would unfold over roughly 50 million years as its descendants moved farther into the ocean and became something the sharks could no longer simply ignore. The result was not one battle, it was an evolutionary rivalry that kept changing both sides. The largest animal ever known to exist is alive right now. The blue whale can reach roughly 30 meters, close to 100 feet, and weigh around 181 metric tons, about 200 tons. It is larger than any dinosaur that ever walked the land. And one of the questions surrounding that enormous body is whether millions of years of predation and competition helped push whales toward extreme size. Then there was a period when the ocean contained two apex predators of almost unimaginable power. Megalodon was hunting in the same seas as enormous predatory whales, including a whale with teeth reaching roughly 36 centimeters, around 14 inches long. For a time, these animals were not separated by millions of years. They shared the same ocean. They hunted in the same world, and neither one occupied the top of the food chain alone. Megalodon eventually disappeared roughly 3.6 million years ago. Whether whales contributed to that decline remains an active scientific question, but the rivalry did not simply vanish when the fossils stopped appearing. It continued in another form. In 1997, off California, orcas killed a great white shark and consumed its liver. Similar behavior has since been documented in other great white habitats, including South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and parts of the Pacific. In some places, great whites began abandoning areas where these particular orcas appeared. The ancient pattern had returned. A predator learns how another predator hunts, the other adapts. The first adapts again. Over millions of years, that pressure leaves its mark in bodies, senses, behavior, and size. The animals alive in the ocean tonight are carrying the results. The rivalry did not produce a simple winner, it produced better predators. In tonight's journey, we're following the rivalry between whales and sharks from the first four-legged ancestor that entered the sea to the giant predators that eventually shared the same waters, and into the modern ocean where that ancient competition is still playing out. But before we do, let me know in the comments, what part of the world are you watching from, and is it day or night there right now? If you enjoy calm videos like this, please give this one a like and maybe subscribe. Let's begin. Long before whales had names, the ocean had already passed through several ages of predators. Sharks belong to a lineage roughly 450 million years old, one that endured the great upheavals of marine life without disappearing. The Ordovician extinction, the Devonian crisis, the Permian catastrophe, and the asteroid impact that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs each transformed the seas around them. Yet shark lineages persisted, adapting as familiar communities vanished and new ones took their place. Their survival was not a straight line, and modern sharks are not unchanged fossils, but the continuity of the lineage reaches deep into the history of the planet. That long inheritance shaped the waters into which the first whale ancestors eventually arrived. Around 50 million years ago, along the shores of the Tethys Sea, a warm inland ocean stretched between land masses that would later become parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. The coastline was a shifting boundary of mud, shallows, rivers, and open water. There, among animals still living firmly on land, a small mammal began spending more of its life near the sea. Pakicetus was not yet a whale in the form we recognize. It was roughly wolf sized, with 4 legs capable of carrying its body across land. Its skull, however, contained an important clue to its future. Structures within the ear were already beginning to resemble those of later whales, giving these early animals a sensory connection to the underwater world. Dense bones also helped make the body less buoyant, an arrangement useful for moving beneath shallow water rather than simply floating at the surface. The transition did not happen in a single leap. Generations remained tied to both worlds, and later members of the lineage became progressively more comfortable in water. Limbs changed, bodies lengthened, nostrils shifted, and the architecture of the spine began adapting to swimming. What began as an animal living beside the sea became a lineage increasingly shaped by it. The sea itself offered no special welcome. Coastal waters already contained predators with millions of years of experience exploiting marine prey, including members of the megatooth shark lineage. Their descendants would eventually include the enormous otodus Megalodon, but the lineage was already established when whale ancestors began testing the boundary between land and water. This matters because the relationship was never simply an encounter between two species. A predator and a prey animal can meet by chance, but an ecological relationship becomes something deeper when the same pressures persist across generations. As early whales spent more time in the sea, they became available to predators that were already adapted to finding struggling or vulnerable animals in shallow water. At the same time, every advantage that helped a whale survive in that environment became part of the lineage carried forward into its descendants. The result was a gradual reshaping of both sides. Sharks did not need to recognize that a new kind of prey had arrived. Their bodies responded through ordinary selection, favoring traits that improved hunting success. The whale lineage faced the same process from the opposite direction, with survival determining which bodies, behaviors, and abilities would remain in the population. By the time these mammals were fully committed to the sea, the boundary they had crossed was no longer geographical. It had become evolutionary. The ocean was no longer a place they visited from land. It had become the environment in which their future would be written, alongside predators whose own history stretched back hundreds of millions of years. That shared environment also meant that neither lineage evolved in isolation. The changing shape of one population altered the opportunities available to the other, while shifts in climate, prey, and coastline continually changed the conditions around them. What began with a terrestrial mammal entering shallow water had become a lasting ecological relationship, written not in a single encounter, but across generations of survival. The first record of this change is not preserved in muscle, skin, or cartilage. It survives in thousands upon thousands of teeth, scattered through ancient sediments like small pieces of a much larger history. Shark skeletons rarely fossilize because cartilage breaks down readily, while teeth are reinforced with dentin and mineralized tissues that can endure burial for immense spans of time. Across that durable record, the megatooth lineage leaves behind a sequence of increasingly specialized weapons. One of the earlier members, Otodus obliquus, lived roughly 60 million years ago, before the great expansion of whales. It was already a substantial predator, reaching around 9 meters, about 30 feet, in length according to some estimates. Its teeth were broad and smooth along the cutting edge, well suited to grasping and processing fish. Small side cusps projected from some teeth, giving the jaws a different appearance from the great serrated blades associated with later megatooth sharks. As marine mammals became established in coastal ecosystems, the dental record began to shift. Serrations appeared along the cutting edges, turning smooth margins into finely divided blades. Over successive members of the lineage, those serrations became more pronounced, while the side cusps diminished and eventually disappeared. Tooth crowns grew taller and more robust, creating surfaces capable of penetrating thick tissue and remaining effective while the jaws moved through resistant flesh. This progression can be followed through several species, including Otodus axuaticus and Otodus chubutensis, before reaching the enormous teeth associated with Otodus megalodon. The names represent different stages within a long evolutionary history rather than sudden replacements. Each population inherited the basic architecture of its predecessors, then altered it gradually as changing environments and available prey favored different forms. The geometry matters because a tooth is more than a fossilized object. Its shape records how force was applied. A smooth edge is useful for gripping, while repeated serrations can create a cutting surface that advances through tissue with less resistance at each point of contact. In large marine mammals, where skin, connective tissue, and layers of blubber could make feeding difficult, that distinction would become increasingly valuable. The same sediments that preserve these teeth also contain the remains of expanding marine mammal communities. Early whales were changing in body size and anatomy, and other marine mammals were becoming increasingly important parts of coastal food webs. The sharks did not need to anticipate those changes. Natural selection operated through countless individual encounters, with successful feeding contributing to the next generation and unsuccessful strategies gradually becoming less common. Across millions of years, the result was a remarkable correspondence between prey and predator. Larger marine mammals created opportunities for sharks capable of opening deeper wounds and removing greater quantities of tissue. Larger, stronger jaws favored larger teeth, while increasingly effective cutting edges made those teeth more useful against substantial prey. The relationship was not a simple ladder leading toward one predetermined animal. It was a branching process shaped by climate, geography, competition, prey availability, and the physical limits of shark anatomy. By the time the lineage reached its later forms, the teeth had become unmistakable instruments of marine mammal predation. Their serrated margins were repeated across thousands of fossils, from deposits on different continents and from oceans that had long since vanished. Each tooth carried only a fragment of the story, yet together they revealed something extraordinary. The arrival of whales had not merely added another source of food to the ocean, it had helped create a new selective landscape, one in which the shark lineage itself was gradually remodeled around the bodies it had learned to pursue slowly. Some of the clearest traces of this early relationship lie far from any modern shoreline, beneath the pale limestone of Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales, in Egypt. What is now desert was once a warm marine basin, and its rocks preserve an extraordinary concentration of Eocene cetaceans. The site lies roughly 145 kilometers, about 90 miles, southwest of Cairo, where ancient seafloor sediments have been lifted and exposed beneath the desert sky. Among those layers are the remains of Basilosaurus, a fully aquatic whale that reached about 18 meters, roughly 59 feet in length, and Dorodon, a smaller whale that grew to around 5 meters, about 16 feet. Their bodies belonged to animals that had already committed themselves completely to the sea. They possessed elongated vertebral columns, powerful tails, and reduced hind limbs, leaving behind the unmistakable anatomy of a lineage that no longer depended on land. Scattered through the same ancient deposits are teeth from large predatory sharks. Their presence alone does not prove an attack, but some whale fossils preserve injuries whose shape and placement provide stronger evidence. Several juvenile Dorodon specimens show damage around the skull, including punctures and crushing that are consistent with bites from large sharks. The marks are especially revealing because the victims were young animals, individuals whose smaller bodies would have made them more manageable targets than mature whales. A juvenile whale was not simply a smaller version of an adult. Its developing body represented a vulnerable stage in the life of the population, when the difference between reaching maturity and disappearing could be measured in a single encounter. Predators that repeatedly removed young animals would alter which individuals survived long enough to reproduce, allowing natural selection to favor characteristics that improved survival during those earliest years. The evidence cannot tell us exactly how these encounters unfolded, and that limitation is important. Fossils preserve contact, not intention. A tooth mark cannot reveal whether a mother was nearby, whether the calf escaped immediately, or how long an injured animal survived. It can, however, preserve the moment after the encounter when the living tissue was already beginning to become geological evidence. It can also preserve the physical consequences of contact between predator and prey. Bone records where force was applied and the concentration of injuries around vulnerable regions can reveal patterns that become meaningful when repeated across specimens. That distinction matters. When reconstructing the ancient ocean, the fossil record does not show a simple contest between enormous adults. Much of predation pressure may have been concentrated where the prey was smallest and least capable of resisting it. For whales, survival therefore depended on more than reaching a larger adult body. The protection and successful rearing of young could become an important part of reproductive success. Modern whales display forms of maternal defense and group protection, but the fossil record cannot place a precise beginning on those behaviors. Their deep origins remain difficult to trace because behavior rarely fossilizes. What the Eocene evidence does provide is a plausible ecological pressure, repeated encounters in which vulnerable young whales represented valuable opportunities for predators. Within the limestone of Wadi al-Hitan, the relationship survives as separate fragments: a skull, a tooth, a puncture, a layer of ancient sediment. None contains the whole encounter. Together, they establish something more enduring. Long before the largest whales had evolved, their ancestors were already living in a sea where survival depended on avoiding teeth, protecting vulnerable stages of life, and passing through youth into adulthood. Growth was a simple answer, but in the history of whales, simplicity became enormous. As early archaeocetes settled more deeply into marine life, larger bodies offered an increasingly useful advantage. A predator that could swallow or seriously injure a small whale would face a different calculation when the same lineage produced an animal several times heavier. Size could turn a vulnerable body into one that demanded more energy, greater risk, and more effort to attack. The early fully marine whales remained modest beside their later descendants. Many archaeocetes measured only a few meters, but their bodies were already being reshaped for sustained swimming. Over generations, selection favored individuals that could survive long enough to reproduce, and body size became one part of that equation. A larger animal was not invulnerable, yet increasing mass could reduce the number of predators capable of treating it as manageable prey. By roughly 37 million years ago, Basilosaurus had reached about 18 meters, roughly 59 feet, in length. Its long body moved through the sea with a powerful tail, while its tiny hind limbs remained as remnants of an older terrestrial inheritance. The animal occupied a very different scale from the first whales, and that difference carried ecological consequences. Predators that had once encountered whale ancestors as relatively accessible targets now faced prey with greater mass, stronger muscles, and a body capable of resisting forces that would have overwhelmed smaller animals. The change can be read beside the shark teeth, preserved in the same broad history. As whale bodies became larger, megatooth sharks also developed larger, more specialized teeth. Neither lineage followed a perfectly smooth path, and climate, prey, abundance, competition, and geography continually altered the direction of evolution. Yet across millions of years, the two records show a persistent relationship between the size of marine mammals and the equipment of the predators pursuing them. The pattern was gradual enough to leave no single moment when the balance changed. A body became slightly larger, survived slightly more encounters, and contributed more descendants. Across deep time, those small differences accumulated until the whale lineage occupied physical territory that its ancestors could never have reached. There was a limit to what growth could accomplish. A whale still had to breathe at the surface, reproduce, find enough food, and move through an environment filled with other demands. Becoming larger required more energy, and an oversized body could only persist where the surrounding ecosystem could support it. Natural selection therefore balanced the benefits of additional mass against its costs, producing different solutions among different whale lineages. Baleen whales eventually pushed that balance into a remarkable new range. During the late Miocene, their increase in body size accelerated beyond what changing food availability alone appears able to explain. A study published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2017 identified this interval as an important phase in the evolution of extreme whale size, with predation pressure considered one possible additional influence. The distinction matters because abundance and danger can work together. Rich feeding grounds can make a larger body possible, while predators can make that body advantageous. When both pressures operate at the same time, natural selection can favor animals that transform available energy into greater mass, provided the survival benefit outweighs the metabolic cost. For a time, increasing size could create a moving boundary between hunter and hunted. Each generation of larger whales changed the scale at which a predator could attack profitably, while each generation of more capable sharks altered that boundary again. The ocean was not producing a single winner. It was repeatedly changing the dimensions of the contest itself, with whale bodies expanding into a space where the next generation of predators would have to follow. Megalodon did not arrive as an isolated giant. Its body was the endpoint of a long enlargement within the megatooth lineage, a gradual accumulation of changes that had begun tens of millions of years earlier. By the Miocene, the predator had reached a scale that transformed the relationship between shark and whale from a contest of teeth and flesh into something closer to an encounter between entire bodies of different proportions. Estimates of its dimensions have shifted as scientists have refined methods for reconstructing a shark from teeth and vertebrae that rarely survive together. A study published in Science Advances in 2022 used body mass modeling to estimate mature megalodon at roughly 15 to 20 meters, about 49 to 66 feet, with mass reaching approximately 70 to 100 metric tons, about 77 to 110 short tons. Other research has suggested individuals approaching 24 meters, about 79 feet, may have existed. The exact upper limit remains debated, while its exceptional size does not. Its teeth provide a more tangible measure. Confirmed megalodon teeth can reach around 18 centimeters, about 7 inches, along the diagonal. A large great white tooth is generally only several centimeters long. The difference is not merely visual. Megalodon's teeth formed a broad cutting apparatus capable of penetrating the thick tissues of animals that could weigh many tons, allowing a single bite to remove a substantial amount of flesh. Fossils also show how widely this predator ranged. Megalodon teeth have been recovered from marine deposits on multiple continents, including North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Such distribution suggests a predator capable of occupying a vast portion of the world's warmer oceans, following the concentrations of large marine prey across changing coastlines and seas. That abundance of habitat was matched by an extraordinary energetic demand. A predator with such a massive body could not survive on occasional small meals. Modeling of its metabolism suggests that an adult megalodon required enormous quantities of energy, making large marine mammals among the most valuable sources of food available. Whales were not simply convenient prey. Their size offered the concentrated energy necessary to sustain a predator operating at this scale. The Miocene Ocean provided an unusual setting for such specialization. Whales had diversified into numerous forms, while dolphins and other marine mammals occupied different feeding niches throughout productive, coastal, and offshore ecosystems. Large pinnipeds also formed part of the broader marine food web. For a predator capable of attacking animals across this range, the ocean offered an immense moving landscape of potential energy. Yet Megalodon's size was not simply a response to abundance. It existed within the same evolutionary pressure that had already been reshaping the whales. As prey became larger, predators capable of exploiting that larger prey gained an advantage. A bigger body could generate greater bite force, carry larger cutting teeth, and store more energy for long searches through the sea. Each feature supported the others, while the same massive frame also allowed the shark to travel between feeding grounds and remain an apex predator across broad seasonal ranges. At this scale, the megatooth lineage had reached a remarkable expression of its ancient design. The animal was still recognizably a shark, built from the same fundamental architecture that had persisted through changing oceans, yet its proportions belonged to a world where marine mammals had become large enough to sustain the largest predatory fish ever known. The escalation had reached a point where predator and prey were now being measured on nearly the same physical scale, each body carrying the accumulated consequences of millions of years of selection. A whale bone can preserve the shape of an attack long after the animal itself has disappeared. Across Miocene deposits from places including California, Chile, Peru, and North Carolina, researchers have found fossilized ribs, vertebrae, flipper bones, and tail elements carrying injuries that reveal where Megalodon placed its teeth. The pattern is striking because the damage is often concentrated on the structures that controlled movement rather than on the head or central body. For much of the 20th century, the natural assumption was that Megalodon hunted much like a giant great white, driving its jaws directly into the largest available target and relying on overwhelming force. Fossil evidence has suggested a more deliberate strategy. Injuries around fins and vertebrae indicate that disabling movement may have been an important part of the attack, particularly when the prey was large enough to remain dangerous after the first bite. A whale's flukes are its primary engines of forward motion, while its flippers help control direction and stability. Damage to these structures would have changed the mechanics of escape. A whale that could no longer accelerate efficiently, turn sharply, or maintain its normal swimming rhythm would become progressively easier for a predator to approach. Instead of depending entirely on a single fatal strike, Megalodon may have been able to reduce the whale's mobility first, then feed as the injured animal weakened. The physical power behind such attacks was extraordinary. Estimates of Megalodon's bite force vary according to the modeling method, but some reconstructions place the upper range near 18,000 kilograms, about 40,000 pounds, of force per square inch. That immense pressure was distributed through enormous jaws and reinforced teeth, allowing the shark to damage bones that were built to withstand the stresses of swimming through the open sea. Whale ribs are not fragile structures. They support a massive body and protect vital organs, while the animal bends and drives itself through water. When a predator can fracture or puncture those bones, it gains access not only to tissue, but also to the mechanical framework supporting the prey. A damaged rib cage can make breathing and swimming more difficult, adding another layer to the effect of the attack. What makes these fossils especially interesting is that they preserve behavior indirectly. A tooth mark does not contain a written account of the encounter, yet repeated injuries in similar anatomical locations allow researchers to compare separate events. When the same kinds of structures are damaged across different whale fossils, a pattern begins to emerge from what would otherwise be isolated wounds. Such a strategy would have required more than strength. The predator had to approach a moving animal, select a vulnerable region, and deliver enough force to impair its escape. The enormous body of a whale created a problem that could not always be solved by biting harder. It had to be approached as a moving system, with the tail, fins, and spine functioning together to keep the animal alive. The fossil record therefore preserves something more subtle than evidence of violence. It preserves traces of interaction between two highly specialized bodies, each operating according to its own physical limits. Megalodon's teeth reveal where it could penetrate, while the location of the wounds reveals where doing so mattered most. Yet there is another detail written into some of these ancient bones, one that changes the meaning of the injuries themselves. Not every whale carrying the marks of a megalodon attack died from them. Some bones began repairing themselves, which means that at least some encounters ended with the whale continuing through the same ocean that had just tried to stop it. One fragment of rib carries a history that the rest of the skeleton cannot tell. Preserved in the Pliocene sediments of the Yorktown Formation in North America, the bone bears several deep lesions that were examined in a study published in the International Journal of Osteoarchaeology. The marks were not merely impressions left on dead tissue. Around them, the bone had begun to grow again. Three pronounced injuries cut across the rib, each with the irregular geometry expected from a powerful bite. The surrounding surface also contains newly formed woven bone, a biological response produced while the animal was still alive. Bone does not rebuild itself after death. The presence of this repair therefore places a living interval between the attack and the animal's eventual death, however much longer or shorter that interval may have been. The identity of the predator cannot be established with absolute certainty. The Pliocene marine deposits of the region contained several large sharks, including Megalodon and other species capable of inflicting substantial wounds. The shape and scale of the lesions are compatible with a large predatory shark, and Megalodon remains one plausible source. That distinction matters because fossils often provide evidence of an event without preserving every participant with certainty. Even with that limitation, the healed bone changes the meaning of a shark bite. The injury was not automatically the end of the whale's life. After the jaws closed, the animal continued breathing, swimming, feeding, and carrying its damaged rib through the surrounding sea. Cells at the edge of the trauma began depositing new bone, slowly rebuilding the structure around the damaged area. Healing transforms a fossil from a record of attack into a record of survival. The predator's teeth remain visible through their effects, but the prey leaves its own biological signature in response. The shark applied force. The whale's body answered by repairing what had been damaged. That response would have mattered far beyond the individual animal. Natural selection does not preserve traits because they are elegant or useful in theory. A characteristic becomes more common when individuals carrying it survive often enough to reproduce. A whale that escaped an attack because it was slightly larger, more agile, better positioned within a group, or simply faster to respond could contribute descendants carrying some of those advantages. The fossil cannot tell us which of those possibilities applied to this particular animal. Its rib does not preserve the movements that allowed escape, the presence of companions, or the distance between predator and prey after the encounter. Those details vanished with the living body. What remains is enough to establish that an attack occurred and that the animal survived it long enough for bone repair to begin. Across generations, such events could accumulate into evolutionary change. A predator does not need to kill every member of a prey population to shape it. It only needs survival to differ consistently between individuals with different traits. Every successful escape can therefore become part of the population's future, while every successful predation removes one possible future from the lineage. The shark's hunting strategy was powerful, but power did not guarantee success. A whale could remain alive after contact, carrying evidence of the encounter within its skeleton as new tissue slowly covered the damaged surface. In that sense, the bone records more than injury. It preserves the small interval in which predation failed, and in evolutionary time, those failures could be as consequential as the kills themselves. The body of a whale carries more than the history of its growth. Its bones, muscles, and social habits preserve different responses to the same persistent problem, each operating on a different scale. Across later cetacean fossils, changes in the architecture of ribs and vertebrae suggest increasing structural specialization as bodies became larger and swimming demands intensified. These changes cannot be assigned to Megalodon alone because climate, locomotion, body mass, and other predators also shaped whale skeletons. Yet stronger supporting structures would have offered an obvious advantage when a large predator attacked the parts of the body responsible for movement. A rib is both protection and framework. Vertebrae form the central chain through which muscular force reaches the tail, and damage to either region can interfere with the mechanics of swimming. As whale bodies expanded, maintaining that framework became increasingly important. Denser and more robust bones could absorb greater loads, while the surrounding muscles and connective tissues evolved alongside them. The result was not armor in the usual sense. It was a body increasingly capable of carrying its own enormous mass while remaining functional after the stresses imposed by rapid movement and physical contact. Speed supplied another form of protection. The fin whale can reach roughly 26 meters, about 85 feet, in length, and has been recorded at burst speeds approaching 37 kilometers per hour, about 23 miles per hour. For a baleen whale that filters tiny prey rather than pursuing individual animals, such acceleration carries a substantial energetic cost. Feeding does not require the body to move like a racing animal. Escape provides a more compelling reason for maintaining such performance. The mechanics of a large whale make this especially interesting. A long body and powerful tail allow enormous animals to generate bursts of forward motion, while flexible joints and streamlined surfaces reduce resistance as that force travels through the water. A predator that depends on closing distance must overcome not only the whale's size, but also its ability to convert stored muscular energy into sudden movement. Even a brief increase in speed can create the distance needed for an attack to fail. Protection also exists beyond the individual body. Modern baleen whales display forms of coordinated defense, in which adults position themselves between vulnerable calves and approaching threats. Mothers may place their bodies directly between a calf and a predator, while other adults can move nearby or form protective arrangements around younger animals. These behaviors are especially visible when orcas approach, but similar protective responses occur across several whale species when young animals are at risk. Behavior does not fossilize easily, so the ancient origins of these responses cannot be placed at a precise moment. Their persistence, nevertheless, fits an evolutionary principle that reaches deep into the rivalry. A calf that survives because an adult blocks an attack is more likely to reach maturity than one left exposed. An adult that repeatedly protects successful offspring contributes more descendants carrying the tendencies that supported that behavior. Bone, speed, and cooperation therefore represent different layers of the same evolutionary response. Structural strength can reduce the consequences of physical impact. Acceleration can create distance from a pursuing predator. Group defense can change the encounter itself, turning a solitary target into a protected member of a larger social unit. None of these traits proves that Megalodon alone created them, but each fits a marine world in which large predators repeatedly tested the limits of whale bodies and behavior. The whale lineage was becoming difficult to approach from a single direction. Its skeleton could bear greater forces, its muscles could drive rapid escape, and its social bonds could place vulnerable animals behind a moving wall of adults. In the Miocene seas, these changes were unfolding while another kind of whale was developing an entirely different way to survive among the same predators. A skull can change the map of an ancient ocean. In 2010, researchers described a nearly complete predatory whale skull from the Pisco Formation of southern Peru, preserved in rocks roughly 13 million years old. Its proportions belonged to an animal, unlike the familiar filter-feeding whales that dominate many modern seas. The jaws carried enormous functional teeth, some approaching 36 centimeters, about 14 inches in length. The animal was named Livyatan melvillei, combining the ancient name Leviathan with a tribute to Herman Melville. Its estimated length falls around 12 to 17 meters, about 40 to 56 feet, placing it within the size range of the largest megalodon estimates. More important than the exact dimensions was its way of life. This whale was a macropredator, equipped to seize substantial prey rather than strain small organisms from seawater. Its skull was broad and heavily constructed, with teeth positioned to grasp and tear large animals. The fossil evidence indicates that other whales were among its potential prey, along with large fish and other substantial marine animals. In the same Miocene seas, Megalodon was also exploiting large marine mammals. Two predators from separate evolutionary lineages had arrived at similar ecological territory, each carrying a different solution to the problem of finding and subduing large prey. Megalodon and Livyatan did not need to attack one another directly for their presence to matter. Their overlap created competition through the animals they both depended upon. A whale swimming through those waters could encounter a predator approaching from below, or another capable hunter moving through the surrounding water. The risks were no longer concentrated in one direction. That changed the value of defensive traits. Greater size could make a whale harder for either predator to overpower. Faster acceleration could shorten the time available for an attack from either side. Group living could make an isolated individual less accessible, particularly when several adults could respond to an approaching predator. An adaptation useful against one hunter could therefore provide protection against another, allowing selection pressures to reinforce one another. The Miocene marine ecosystem was exceptionally rich in large mammals. Numerous whale species occupied different feeding strategies and body forms, while dolphins, seals, and other animals filled additional ecological roles. Within this moving community, Leviathan and Megalodon occupied overlapping positions near the upper edge of predation, yet their hunting styles were not identical. One was a mammal, breathing air at the surface and using a powerful jaw apparatus to seize prey. The other was a giant shark, whose entire body was adapted for life in seawater. Their coexistence created an unusual ecological geometry. Predation pressure did not simply increase in quantity, it became more varied. The prey had to contend with predators that differed in anatomy, movement, sensory abilities, and attack patterns. Survival could depend on traits that were broadly useful across several kinds of encounters rather than optimized for one particular enemy. Fossils cannot show the full texture of these interactions. They cannot record how whale groups altered their movements when predators appeared, or whether certain species avoided particular feeding grounds. Yet, the anatomy of Leviathan reveals that the upper levels of the Miocene food web were not occupied by a single dominant form. Two immense predators, each capable of pursuing large marine prey, shared the same broad oceanic world. For the whales living beneath those apex predators, the evolutionary landscape had become unusually demanding. The pressure came from different directions, but it converged on the same basic requirement: remain difficult to catch, injure, and consume. Over time, that requirement could favor bodies and behaviors capable of solving several problems at once, creating a marine world in which survival increasingly depended on versatility. The surface was no longer the only place where a whale could survive. As the Miocene Ocean became crowded with powerful hunters, one branch of the whale lineage began solving the problem in a direction neither larger bodies nor faster escapes could reach. It descended. Modern sperm whales can dive beyond 2,000 meters, about 6,600 feet, and some confirmed records pass 2,100 meters, about 6,900 feet, beneath the surface. Their dives can last well over an hour, with recorded durations approaching 90 minutes. At those depths, pressure becomes immense, light fades almost completely, and the physical conditions differ profoundly from those of the sunlit waters where large predatory sharks were most effective. Megalodon teeth occur across warm coastal deposits around the world, providing a broad picture of its preferred marine setting. The shark was capable of traveling widely, but its enormous body carried a substantial energetic cost. Deep, cold water offered less of the concentrated marine mammal abundance that supported a giant predator, while the effort required to maintain body temperature and pursue prey at depth would have increased the cost of every hunt. Depth therefore created an ecological boundary, not an absolute wall, but a region where the economics of hunting became increasingly unfavorable for such a massive fish. The sperm whale lineage moved through that boundary by changing its entire physiology. Its muscles contain extraordinarily high concentrations of myoglobin, an oxygen-binding protein that allows muscle tissue to store oxygen before a dive begins. The concentration is so great that sperm whale muscle appears dark red-brown. Blood also carries unusually large oxygen reserves, while the animal can reduce blood flow to less essential tissues during prolonged submersion, preserving oxygen for the organs that matter most. Another remarkable structure lies inside the head. The spermaceti organ contains a large volume of specialized waxy material and forms part of a sophisticated system involved in buoyancy, control, and sound production. Changes in the physical state and position of this material have been proposed as contributors to regulating the whale's movement through the water column. The head itself is enormous, and its architecture reflects a life increasingly centered on deep water hunting rather than surface pursuit. Sound became equally important. In the darkness of the deep ocean, vision can no longer provide the detailed information available near the surface. Sperm whales produce powerful clicks and use their returning echoes to locate prey. The clicks can reach extraordinarily high sound levels, with estimates around 236 decibels referenced for the most intense signals. Their echolocation allows these whales to search through water where sunlight has almost entirely disappeared, locating squid and other animals within a three-dimensional world that a surface predator cannot easily dominate. The fossil record suggests that early sperm whales possessed less specialized skulls and bodies than their modern descendants. Through the Miocene, the lineage developed increasingly pronounced adaptations for deep diving, including changes to the skull, respiratory system, and overall body design. These transformations did not simply make the whale better at descending. They opened an ecological space with different prey, different pressures, and different physical rules. The result was not an escape route in the ordinary sense, but a separate ecological layer where pressure, darkness, temperature, and prey availability rewarded an entirely different collection of adaptations. In that deeper realm, the whale did not need to outrun every predator. It needed a body capable of going somewhere the largest coastal hunters were poorly suited to follow, then remaining there long enough to make depth itself part of its survival strategy. There is a point in evolution where becoming larger stops being merely an advantage and begins to reshape the entire architecture of an animal. Among whales, that point produced the blue whale, a creature whose dimensions eventually moved beyond anything the ocean had previously supported. The largest blue whales can approach 30 meters, about 98 feet, in length, with masses exceeding 150 metric tons, about 165 tons. Exceptional individuals may approach 200 metric tons, about 220 tons. No dinosaur, terrestrial mammal, or other known animal has been confirmed to surpass the blue whale in total mass. Its body represents an extraordinary concentration of living tissue, assembled around a simple evolutionary principle that had been accumulating strength for millions of years. Inside that enormous frame, familiar organs become immense. A mature blue whale heart can weigh roughly 180 kilograms, about 400 pounds. Its tongue alone can weigh as much as a large terrestrial mammal. Blood vessels must carry oxygen and nutrients through a body extending nearly the length of a small building, while muscles, bones, lungs, and connective tissues all operate under the demands created by extreme scale. Every additional meter of body length brings additional energetic costs, yet the lineage continued moving upward. The fossil record shows that this acceleration was not evenly distributed through whale history. During the late Miocene and Pliocene, some baleen whales began reaching extraordinary sizes, with the largest forms pushing beyond 20 meters, about 66 feet, and eventually approaching the dimensions seen in living blue whales. A study published in 2017 found that this increase could not be explained by food availability alone. Changes in ocean productivity mattered, but they did not completely account for the sudden expansion of maximum body size. other pressures had entered the equation. Predation provides one possible part of that explanation. A larger whale is harder to disable, harder to isolate, and more difficult for a predator to overpower. The same increase that makes a body expensive to maintain also changes the mathematics of an attack. A young whale can be vulnerable to a large predator. An adult approaching the upper limits of whale size becomes a fundamentally different proposition. That transformation is especially important because blue whales did not evolve into hunters. Their immense bodies are supported by baleen, allowing them to filter enormous concentrations of tiny prey from the sea. During periods of intense feeding, a blue whale can consume several metric tons, about several tons, of krill in a single day. The energy required to sustain such an animal is vast, yet the reward is equally unusual. A dense patch of small prey can provide enough energy to support one of the largest bodies evolution has ever assembled. Predation, meanwhile, reaches a different boundary. Modern killer whales have been documented attacking blue whale calves and, in some cases, larger individuals, but healthy adult blue whales have no confirmed natural predator capable of regularly killing them. Their enormous size has transformed the relationship between predator and prey. The whale no longer survives by being merely difficult to catch. At full maturity, it becomes too large for the ocean's most capable hunters to treat as ordinary prey. That distinction marks a profound change in the ancient contest. For tens of millions of years, increasing whale size had invited larger predators, while increasingly capable predators had rewarded further defenses. Eventually, the trajectory reached a body so immense that the usual logic of the arms race began to break down. The blue whale carries that history in its proportions, not as a weapon, but as a living boundary to what predation can overcome. The first fracture in the rivalry did not appear in a tooth or a bone. It emerged across the climate itself, as the Miocene Ocean gradually lost some of the warmth that had supported its immense communities of marine life. Cooling began during the late Miocene, roughly 7 to 5 million years ago, as Antarctic ice expanded and ocean temperatures declined. The change unfolded across geological time, but its consequences reached into every level of the food web. Warm coastal habitats became less extensive, particularly in the subtropical and tropical regions where Megalodon had been most closely associated with abundant marine mammals. Fossil teeth provide a useful map of that changing world. They occur across many parts of the globe, yet confirmed remains are uncommon in genuinely cold marine deposits. The pattern suggests a predator whose success was closely tied to particular thermal conditions rather than an animal equally comfortable across every ocean environment. For a shark of such immense size, that distinction mattered. Megalodon was an active predator with a large energetic demand, and its hunting grounds needed to contain enough substantial prey to make that investment worthwhile. As productive warm water nursery areas contracted, the places where young marine mammals could grow and where larger animals could gather became less dependable. A shrinking habitat did not merely reduce territory, it altered the geography of opportunity itself. The prey base was changing at the same time. During the Pliocene, numerous large marine mammals disappeared from the fossil record, including several lineages that had contributed to the extraordinary diversity of the earlier Miocene seas. The exact causes varied among species and regions, involving climate change, shifts in ocean productivity, altered currents, and changing habitats. Yet, the combined effect was important for a predator dependent on large-bodied prey. Less suitable habitat meant fewer opportunities, while fewer large animals meant a smaller energetic foundation. Whales possessed an advantage that did not come from teeth, speed, or armor. They generated their own body heat and could maintain internal temperatures while moving through colder water. Their feeding ecology also allowed many species to follow changing concentrations of prey across broad oceanic regions. As currents shifted and productive waters migrated, whales could travel with those resources, extending their range into environments that imposed different demands, but also offered new feeding opportunities. Megalodon's specialization had once been its greatest strength. A massive body, powerful jaws, and a dentition adapted for cutting large marine mammals formed an extraordinarily effective hunting system while the surrounding ecosystem remained favorable. Yet, specialization can narrow the pathways available when conditions change. A predator finely tuned to warm coastal ecosystems cannot simply exchange one thermal environment for another without physiological and ecological consequences. The same ocean that had allowed Megalodon to reach its greatest expression was becoming a different ocean. Cooling waters altered coastlines, prey distributions, nursery grounds, and migration routes, while the whales retained the physiological flexibility to move through a broader range of conditions. Their survival did not require defeating every attack or overpowering every predator. It required remaining viable as the world around them changed. By the later Pliocene, Megalodon was disappearing from the fossil record. The evidence does not point to a single final battle, but to a long erosion of the conditions that had sustained it. Its enormous size, once perfectly matched to its prey and habitat, became increasingly expensive in a world offering fewer of both. The rivalry had been shaped by millions of years of biological responses, yet its decisive shift came from something neither lineage could control: the changing character of the sea itself. By the time the great shark began disappearing, another kind of predator was already moving through the changing ocean. Early members of the lineage that would eventually produce modern killer whales appeared during the late Miocene and Pliocene, entering ecosystems where large marine mammals were becoming increasingly important sources of food. They were not yet the highly specialized hunters known from living seas, but their biology gave them an unusual advantage. Warm blood allowed them to function across a broad range of temperatures, while flexible diets allowed them to shift between fish, seals, and marine mammals as conditions changed. That flexibility mattered because the world surrounding Megalodon was becoming less forgiving. Cooling waters were reducing the extent of the warm coastal environments that had supported enormous concentrations of marine mammals. As prey communities contracted, competition for the remaining productive habitats became more important. A predator able to change its diet had options. A predator dependent upon large marine mammals had fewer. The early killer whale lineage also carried another useful inheritance. These animals lived socially, and social hunting can turn several moderately capable predators into a coordinated force. There is no reason to imagine the sophisticated cultural traditions of modern killer whales appearing all at once. Intelligence, cooperation, and flexible behavior existed in simpler forms long before the modern species. In a changing ecosystem, those traits could allow a population to exploit opportunities that a highly specialized hunter could not reach. The timing is important. Megalodon had already become vulnerable because its preferred warm habitats were shrinking and many large marine mammals were declining. Into that increasingly fragmented world came predatory whales, capable of operating in cooler conditions and exploiting a broader selection of prey. Their arrival did not need to involve direct battles with giant sharks to matter. Competition can reshape an ecosystem simply by changing which animals gain access to food, nursery grounds, and migration corridors. This is where the history of the rivalry takes on an unusual shape. For millions of years, whale evolution had been influenced by predation from megatooth sharks. Larger bodies made whales harder to overpower. Greater swimming ability improved escape. Social behavior offered protection to vulnerable young, deep diving, opened environments beyond the reach of the largest coastal shark. Each response changed the whale lineage, and each successful adaptation altered the ecological landscape in which later generations lived. Eventually, the descendants of those repeatedly pressured whales became predators in their own right. The transition was not a simple reversal because modern killer whales and their ancestors belonged to a different branch of the cetacean family tree, yet the broader ecological relationship remained connected. The prey lineage had accumulated traits that made some of its descendants highly capable competitors, while the predator lineage remained constrained by the specialization that had once made it so successful. The final confirmed Megalodon fossils date to roughly 3.6 million years ago. Its disappearance was probably not a single event, but a prolonged decline shaped by cooling seas, changing prey communities, shrinking habitat, and increasing competition. Populations became rarer until the enormous shark that had dominated warm marine ecosystems for millions of years was no longer present in the fossil record. There was no final confrontation between two legendary animals. The ending was more gradual than that. One lineage adapted to a changing planet, while the other found that the conditions that had supported its extraordinary success were disappearing, and the balance of the ocean shifted beyond recognition. The prey had not destroyed its ancient predator, it had simply survived the world that the predator could no longer inhabit. Megalodon left behind more than empty space in the food web. Its disappearance altered where whales could live, where they could raise their young, and how energy moved between the deep ocean and the sunlit surface. For generations of marine mammals, the coastal margins had been places where survival carried a particular cost. With the great shark gone, those margins became available again, and whale populations could expand into habitats that had once favored the predator. The change was not simply a matter of geography. Large whales are mobile connections between different layers of the ocean. They feed at depth, carrying nutrients into their bodies, then return toward the surface and release waste rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and other elements required by microscopic marine life. Those nutrients can stimulate phytoplankton growth, linking the movements of the largest animals to organisms too small to see from the surface. As whale numbers and distributions changed, so did the pathways by which nutrients circulated through coastal and open waters. This process is often described as the whale pump. It does not mean that whales alone control ocean productivity, because currents, upwelling, sunlight, temperature, and countless other organisms remain essential. Yet, the presence of large whales can strengthen nutrient recycling by transporting material between depths and surface waters. When a population expands into a new region, its feeding and movement can alter that region's biological rhythms in ways that reach far beyond the animals themselves. Megalodon's disappearance, therefore, had consequences that extended beyond the loss of a predator. Removing a major source of mortality could change whale abundance, migration routes, nursery habitats, and the timing of seasonal movements. Those changes would then influence the animals that fed on whales, the organisms that depended on their waste, and the predators competing for the same marine mammals. Migration could redistribute feeding pressure across entire coastlines, while newly accessible nursery grounds could alter survival rates for calves and gradually reshape population structure. A single extinction could travel through an ecosystem as a series of connected adjustments rather than one isolated event. Something equally important happened inside the whales themselves. For tens of millions of years, predation had favored bodies capable of enduring pursuit, resisting injury, escaping attack, and protecting vulnerable young. Once that pressure weakened, those traits no longer carried exactly the same evolutionary value. Natural selection does not preserve every costly adaptation simply because it was useful in the past. Features that demand energy or impose biological limits can gradually change when the environment no longer rewards them. The post Megalodon ocean was therefore not a return to some earlier state. Extinction had removed one constraint, but it had not erased the ecological relationships created during the long period of predation. Great white sharks occupied part of the vacant predatory landscape, while other marine predators expanded into opportunities left behind. The whale lineages, meanwhile, carried millions of years of accumulated adaptations into a world where the particular predator that had helped shape them was absent. Even the disappearance of one enormous shark could therefore influence creatures separated from it by entire branches of the evolutionary tree. Nutrients moved differently. Whales moved differently. Predators encountered different opportunities. Coastal ecosystems received new combinations of animals and energy. The great rivalry had begun with predation, but its first major turning point ended in something broader than victory. One predator disappeared, and the ocean reorganized around its absence. The whales remained, carrying the biological history of that ancient pressure within their bodies, while the waters around them continued to change. After the great shark vanished, the ocean did not simply replace one giant predator with another. The great white inherited part of the ecological space, but not the scale that had once defined it. Its body belonged to a different branch of shark evolution, one that had followed its own path for tens of millions of years before Megalodon disappeared. The distinction becomes especially clear in the skeleton. A very large great white can reach around 6 meters, about 20 feet, while its mass can approach 2,300 kilograms, about 5,000 pounds. That is only a small fraction of the estimated mass of Megalodon. The difference changes everything. A predator of this size can still intercept marine mammals, but the largest whales occupy a physical range beyond its practical reach. The ocean had retained a powerful hunter, yet the enormous ecological pressure once exerted by Megalodon had become narrower. Even the teeth carry a subtle record of this separation. Great white teeth are broad, triangular, and finely serrated, while Megalodon's teeth were vastly larger and built to engage much greater volumes of tissue. Their resemblance is not evidence of close ancestry. Instead, it is an example of convergent evolution, in which unrelated animals, exposed to similar demands, arrive at similar biological solutions. Marine mammals offered a rich source of energy, and cutting flesh efficiently favored comparable tooth geometry in two shark lineages separated by immense spans of evolutionary history. Size was no longer the only answer. The great white developed a different balance between acceleration, maneuverability, and attack timing. Individuals can reach speeds near 40 kilometers per hour, about 25 miles per hour, in short bursts, allowing them to approach prey from below and strike with concentrated momentum. The strategy depends on position as much as strength. A smaller body can become an advantage when an attack requires sudden movement, precise timing, and rapid withdrawal. This difference becomes important around whales. Great whites can prey on calves and smaller marine mammals, while healthy adult baleen whales generally lie beyond the effective hunting range of a single shark. The old relationship between giant shark and giant whale had therefore been reduced to a different scale. Predation remained part of the ocean's balance, but the predator could no longer impose the same broad pressure across every stage of a whale's life. The change also reveals something about extinction itself. When a dominant predator disappears, evolution does not necessarily produce an identical replacement. Ecological roles are shaped by anatomy, climate, prey, availability, and competition, so the vacant space may be divided among several species rather than inherited whole. Great whites took one portion of the marine predatory landscape, while other sharks, toothed whales, and large marine mammals occupied different portions. For the whales, this meant that survival was no longer organized around one immense enemy. The old selection pressure had fractured into many smaller pressures, each favoring different responses. Some whales continued toward enormous size. Others remained more agile, more specialized, or better suited to particular habitats. Their evolutionary paths could now diverge without every lineage facing the same colossal predator. The great white therefore stands as a partial heir, not a replacement. Its serrated teeth preserve an echo of an ancient solution, its hunting style reflects a different physical design, and its limits reveal how extraordinary the previous predator had been. The rivalry survived, but its proportions had changed. On the whale side, another lineage had been developing beyond the reach of any shark, and its story would unfold in an ocean where intelligence itself could become a form of predation. In September of 1997, the waters around the Farallon Islands became the setting for an encounter that would change how scientists understood the relationship between whales and sharks. A whale-watching vessel observed two orcas approach. A large great white shark, an animal more than 3 meters, about 10 feet, in length. What followed was not a prolonged chase. The interaction was controlled, precise, and directed toward a particular part of the shark's anatomy. One orca rolled the shark onto its back, producing tonic immobility, a temporary state in which the animal's normal motor responses become greatly reduced. The second orca then opened the shark's abdomen and removed its liver. The choice was remarkably specific. A great white shark's liver can account for a substantial portion of its body mass and contains large quantities of squalene, an energy-rich lipid that also contributes to buoyancy. For a predator seeking concentrated nutrition, the organ represented an unusually valuable reward. The significance of the observation extended beyond the death of one shark. The orcas appeared to understand several linked steps within the encounter. The shark had to be positioned in a vulnerable state, its body opened at a precise location, and the liver removed while much of the carcass remained untouched. Such behavior suggests more than physical strength. It points toward a form of ecological knowledge in which the anatomy of another animal becomes part of a learned hunting tradition. That distinction matters because orcas live in tightly connected social groups, and their hunting methods can vary between populations. Different communities develop different prey preferences, vocal traditions, travel patterns, and techniques. Some pursue fish, while others specialize in marine mammals. Knowledge acquired during a successful hunt can remain within a group, carried through repeated observation and practice rather than encoded only in inherited anatomy. After the Farallon Islands observation, similar interactions were documented in other parts of the world. Great white sharks were found with their livers removed near South Africa, and comparable predation was later reported around New Zealand, Australia, and other Pacific waters. The geographic separation of these events made the pattern especially intriguing. Separate populations appeared capable of exploiting the same vulnerable feature of the shark's body, although the exact routes by which such behavior spreads remain an active subject of scientific study. The consequences reached beyond individual encounters. Great white sharks are important predators in coastal ecosystems, influencing the distribution and behavior of seals, sea lions, fish, and other marine animals. Where orcas began hunting them regularly, shark activity changed. Some great whites abandoned areas where they had previously fed, leaving behind shifts in the behavior of their own prey. A predatory interaction could therefore reshape an ecosystem without requiring large numbers of sharks to be killed. The difference was not simply that one predator had become stronger. The deeper change was that information itself had entered the contest, allowing experience within one generation to alter what the next generation could accomplish. For the first time in the modern record, the old direction of pressure had become unmistakably reversed. The whale lineage was no longer merely adapting to predators in the water around it. At least one branch had become capable of recognizing a predator as prey, exploiting its anatomy with practiced precision, and passing the technique through a social network. The encounter at the Farallon Islands was brief in geological terms, yet its meaning reached backward across millions of years. The ancient rivalry had once been written in teeth, wounds, and changes in body size. Now it was being expressed through memory, cooperation, and learned behavior, with a whale carrying knowledge that could turn one of the ocean's most formidable hunters into a source of food. An ocean can change without a single boundary moving. Sometimes the map is redrawn by behavior. When one predator enters an area and another simply stops appearing there. Around the Farallon Islands, this became visible after orcas began hunting great white sharks. Acoustic monitoring recorded the change with unusual clarity. Great white sharks disappeared from the monitored area within hours of confirmed orca presence, rather than gradually drifting away over many days. For the remainder of the season, their usual acoustic signatures did not return. The significance lies in what was absent. No physical barrier had closed the feeding grounds, and the seals that attracted great whites remained part of the ecosystem. The sharks had not lost the ability to hunt there. They had encountered a predator whose presence altered the calculation of remaining. A place could still contain food and yet become unsuitable when the risk of being detected, approached, or attacked became too high. A similar pattern emerged on the opposite side of the world. False Bay in South Africa had long been associated with great white sharks, particularly around Seal Island, where the sharks hunted Cape fur seals. Researchers and wildlife filmmakers had spent decades documenting these interactions. Then, beginning around 2017, great white sightings declined sharply and remained unusually scarce. Among the orcas moving through South African waters were two individuals known as port and starboard, named for the directions associated with their respective sides of a vessel. Their collapsed dorsal fins made them recognizable to researchers, and their hunting behavior became increasingly distinctive. They were documented killing great white sharks as well as other shark species, including broadnose, seven-gill sharks, and smooth-hound sharks. Their presence added a new layer to the ecology of False Bay, because the danger facing a great white was no longer limited to the animals it pursued. When the great whites became scarce, other predators occupied portions of the space they had left behind. Bronze whaler sharks, which had often remained subordinate to larger great whites, expanded their presence in areas where the larger predators were less common. Their movements and feeding behavior changed with the altered distribution of competitors, allowing pressure to fall differently on smaller animals within the same food web. This kind of cascade does not require constant attacks. A predator can shape an ecosystem simply by becoming a credible possibility. Prey animals change their routes, feeding times, depth, and habitat selection when the cost of remaining in one place becomes too high. Other predators then respond to those changes, and the effects travel outward through relationships that may never involve direct contact. The pattern has a deep history. Long before modern orcas learned to exploit sharks, predatory whales and giant sharks occupied overlapping marine worlds, each placing pressure on the other through hunting, avoidance, and changes in prey distribution. The fossil record preserves the physical traces of that competition, while modern observations reveal its behavioral dimension in real time. What makes the modern ocean especially revealing is that intelligence allows the pressure to move through social memory. An orca does not need to occupy every bay permanently to influence where sharks can live. The reputation created by repeated encounters can become part of the landscape, carried by the behavior of animals that have learned where danger is likely to appear. False Bay, therefore, became more than a place where one predator replaced another. It became an example of how an apex hunter can redraw an ecological map without claiming every part of it. The great whites were still alive elsewhere, the seals were still present, and the bay itself had not changed shape. Yet the relationships within it had shifted, and the food web began reorganizing around an absence created by another predator's presence. Every year, the ocean becomes a map drawn by movement. A gray whale leaves feeding grounds in the far north and travels toward the sheltered lagoons of Baja California, following a route that can span roughly 12,000 miles round trip. The journey carries the whale between radically different worlds, from cold waters rich with food to warm coastal regions where calves are born, and then back again. Between those destinations lies a geography shaped not only by nourishment, but by the presence of predators. For a newborn calf, the timing is especially important. Gray whale calves begin their first migration only weeks after birth, when their bodies are still developing and their swimming abilities have not reached the strength of adulthood. Their mothers guide them through coastal waters where several large shark species occur, while orcas may also hunt along portions of the route. At places such as Point Reyes on the California coast, researchers have documented repeated encounters between migrating whales and predators, revealing that these passages are not merely corridors between feeding and breeding grounds. They are recurring zones of risk. The destination itself carries another layer of meaning. Laguna San Ignacio, Magdalena Bay, and the waters once known as Scammons Lagoon provide shallow, protected environments where gray whales give birth. Their entrances are limited. Their waters are comparatively sheltered, and their physical structure differs from the open coastal routes surrounding them. For a calf, reaching such a place changes the balance of exposure. The mother has not eliminated danger from the world, but she has brought her young into a setting where some large predators are less able to operate effectively. That pattern appears across the baleen whales. Humpback whales travel toward warm breeding grounds before returning to colder feeding regions, carrying calves between habitats separated by enormous distances. The same broad rhythm appears in other migratory species, each following routes shaped by the seasonal distribution of food, temperature, breeding conditions, and predation. Migration, therefore, becomes more than a search for resources. It is a biological compromise written across geography. Cold waters may offer abundant feeding opportunities, yet breeding there can expose newborn calves to conditions unsuitable for their early development. Warm coastal waters can provide advantages for reproduction, while also bringing whales closer to predators that patrol those regions. The route between these places becomes a balance between competing costs, repeated through countless generations. Such routes are not reinvented from the beginning each year. Young whales learn portions of their movements through association with experienced adults, while inherited tendencies help guide the broader timing and direction of migration. In species such as humpback whales, populations maintain remarkably consistent seasonal destinations, even when individual animals may vary in the precise paths they take. Over immense spans of time, successful routes become embedded within the behavior of a population. A mother that reaches a productive feeding ground can pass more than nourishment to her calf. She can pass the knowledge of where to travel, when to travel, and which coastal passages deserve greater caution. The information is carried without maps or written records, preserved through memory, imitation, and repeated survival. That makes every migration a living record of pressures that began long before modern oceans existed. The whales moving between breeding grounds and feeding grounds are not retracing a single ancient route, unchanged through time. They are continuing a process of adjustment, carrying biological and social knowledge through changing seas. Each passage reflects the same enduring negotiation between finding enough food to sustain an enormous body and finding enough safety to bring the next generation into the ocean. Along coastlines around the world, some of the clearest records of the modern rivalry arrive only after a whale has reached the shore. A stranded cetacean can carry evidence that began hundreds of miles offshore, preserved not in a photograph or recording, but in the pattern left across skin, muscle, and bone. Each mark has a history, and forensic examination can sometimes recover part of it. Roughly 2,000 cetacean strandings are recorded globally each year, although the number varies substantially between regions and years. Among these animals, calves and smaller species can bear injuries caused by sharks, and the distinction between an attack and ordinary scavenging depends upon details that are easy to miss without careful examination. A bite made while an animal is alive leaves a different biological record from one made after death. Tissue surrounding an ante-mortem wound may show bruising, hemorrhage, torn muscle, and other evidence that blood was circulating when the injury occurred. In some cases, healing tissue can reveal that the animal survived the encounter for a period afterward. A scavenger feeding on a carcass leaves another pattern, often with cleaner tissue separation and without the same signs of an active biological response. This distinction matters because a tooth mark alone does not prove predation. A shark can feed on an animal that was already dead, and the resulting wounds may resemble those produced during an attack. Forensic work, therefore, becomes a reconstruction of sequence. The position of a bite, the depth and geometry of the wound, the condition of surrounding tissue, and signs of healing can together establish whether the whale was alive when the teeth entered its body. Modern observations are beginning to connect those forensic traces with events that can actually be witnessed. Tiger sharks have been documented attacking humpback whale calves in Hawaiian waters and near eastern Australia, including encounters captured by underwater cameras. Such observations provide something fossil specialists rarely receive: a direct view of the interaction between predator and whale, allowing researchers to compare living behavior with the patterns preserved in stranded animals. The vulnerable target remains especially revealing. A newborn whale represents an enormous investment of energy and time by its mother, yet its developing body is less capable of resisting an attack than that of an adult. Predators can exploit this difference without needing to overpower the largest members of the species. The same broad principle appears deep in the fossil record, where ancient sharks left tooth marks on early whales and their relatives, including juvenile forms preserved in the rocks of Wadi al-Hitan in Egypt. Those ancient wounds belong to animals, separated from modern whales by tens of millions of years, and the oceans themselves have changed beyond recognition. Yet the geometry of feeding injuries can preserve a surprisingly consistent biological strategy. A predator encounters a vulnerable whale, bites into living tissue, and tests whether the prey can escape. The evidence does not suggest that every stranded whale with shark marks was killed by a shark, nor that modern attacks occur with the same frequency as they did in ancient seas. What it does reveal is continuity. The interaction between sharks and cetaceans did not vanish when Megalodon disappeared. It became smaller in scale, changed in its participants, and remained embedded within the living ocean. Today, every documented bite adds another piece to that record. Fossil bone once preserved the evidence for ancient encounters. Now cameras, pathology, strandings, and careful forensic study can capture the same relationship from different angles. The rivalry is therefore not confined to extinct seas or museum specimens. Its newest traces are being left on living animals, and some of them are still being discovered along the shore. A shark does not need to see a whale to begin finding it. Long before an outline appears in the water, the animal can register traces that exist beyond ordinary sight, turning the surrounding ocean into a field of signals. Across the shark's body, several sensory systems work together, each suited to a different part of the problem created by large, mobile prey. Near the snout are the ampullae of Lorenzini, tiny pores connected to jelly-filled canals that detect extremely weak electrical fields. The muscles of every living animal produce electrical activity, and that activity creates a minute field in the surrounding water. Sharks can detect fields extraordinarily close to 1 billionth of a volt. For a whale moving through open water, the consequence is profound. Even when visibility is poor, the electrical signature produced by muscle activity can provide another route to detection, allowing the shark to sense living prey without relying entirely on reflected light. The lateral line adds another layer. Along the head and body, specialized sensory structures respond to changes in pressure and movement within the surrounding water. A large animal swimming through the sea displaces water with every movement of its body, generating disturbances that travel outward. The shark can register those changes and build a sense of movement around itself, even when the source remains beyond direct view. Then there is smell, carried through water over considerable distances. Sharks possess an exceptionally sensitive olfactory system, capable of detecting minute concentrations of dissolved chemicals. Blood and other biological compounds released by an injured animal can create a chemical trail that extends through the surrounding water. For a predator searching a vast ocean, this transforms scent into a kind of long-distance information, connecting the shark with an event it cannot yet see. These senses become especially meaningful when considered alongside the changing whale lineage. A whale that grows larger presents a bigger target, but it also changes the physical signals available to a predator. Greater speed alters the pressure patterns produced during movement. Social behavior introduces several bodies moving together, creating a more complicated field of motion. Deep diving changes the light available to vision, while migration carries whales through waters where visibility can vary with depth, sediment, and plankton. The shark therefore evolved within an environment filled with information, where distance itself became a source of information, learning to extract useful signals from electrical activity, pressure disturbances, and chemical traces. None of these systems exists for a single purpose, and it would be too simple to assign each one entirely to whale hunting. Sharks use electroreception to locate many kinds of prey, employ their lateral lines during navigation and feeding, and rely on smell throughout their lives. Yet each capability becomes valuable when a large marine mammal is present. There is an elegant reciprocity in this. The whale lineage changed under predation, becoming larger, more capable of rapid movement, more socially coordinated, and better adapted to varied environments. The sharks responding to those changes carried their own refinements forward, building sensory systems capable of detecting traces that ordinary vision could miss. The result is written into both animals. The whale's body records the pressure of being hunted through its anatomy and behavior. The shark's body records the same history through sensors that gather information from the water itself. Their rivalry is therefore more than a contest between predator and prey. It is an exchange written into living tissue, where every new advantage on one side creates another problem for the other, and the ocean becomes the medium through which both bodies continue answering each other. For a whale, sound is not merely something carried through the sea. It is part of the architecture of life itself, traveling beyond the reach of vision and binding individuals across distances that would make ordinary contact impossible. In the long history of the rivalry, this became an especially useful medium because the ocean could hide a body while still carrying its voice. Blue whales produce calls that can reach about 188 decibels at frequencies below the range of unaided human hearing. Those sounds can travel thousands of miles through seawater, where low frequency energy can move efficiently across enormous distances. A single call can therefore occupy a volume of ocean far larger than the animal producing it, allowing individuals to maintain contact across feeding grounds and migration routes separated by vast stretches of water. Sperm whales use sound in a different way. Their clicks can reach roughly 236 decibels, making them among the most intense biological sounds ever measured. At depths approaching 2,100 meters, about 6,900 feet, sunlight has almost entirely disappeared, yet a sperm whale can navigate and search through darkness using echolocation. Rapid clicks leave the animal, encounter objects, and return as echoes carrying information about distance, shape, movement, and texture. This acoustic world also changes the balance between predator and prey. Sharks possess sensitive hearing and can detect low-frequency disturbances, but they do not communicate through elaborate learned vocal systems comparable to those of cetaceans. Whale groups can exchange information through calls while remaining largely beyond the interpretive abilities of a shark. A calf can remain connected to its mother. Individuals can coordinate movement. Social groups can maintain contact across distance. Much of that information travels through a channel shaped by the whales themselves. Humpback whales take this further through culture. Their songs are not fixed sequences inherited like the structure of a fin or a tooth. Populations develop distinctive patterns, and new elements can spread from one group to another across ocean basins. A song introduced by one population may gradually appear elsewhere, creating a moving acoustic tradition that changes over time. The transmission is social rather than purely genetic, meaning that information can travel through generations without waiting for biological evolution to rewrite the animal's body. Genomic research adds another layer to this history. A study published in 2019 compared 10 cetacean genomes and found evidence of accelerated evolution in genes associated with vocal learning and acoustic processing during the Miocene. Such findings cannot reduce a complex evolutionary story to a single cause, but they reveal that the machinery supporting sophisticated sound processing was changing during an era when whales were becoming increasingly diverse and socially complex. The significance reaches beyond volume or distance. Sound gave whales a way to occupy an environment in several dimensions at once, communicating through darkness, around physical barriers, and across distances where bodies could not remain together. It also allowed learned information to persist within communities, giving behavior a memory that could outlive individual animals. A shark could follow scent, pressure, and electrical traces through the water, but the whale lineage developed another kind of presence. Its signals could move through the same ocean without revealing every movement that produced them. Over immense spans of time, communication became more than a means of contact. It became part of the whale's ecological identity, carried through families and populations, and shaped by a world in which survival depended not only on where an animal went, but also on how its society remained connected while moving through the sea. The bones and teeth preserve one layer of the ancient struggle, but another record lies inside every living cell. In the sequences that shape proteins, regulate repair, and govern the body's response to stress, evolution has left traces of the conditions that shaped whale and shark lineages across deep time. For whales, some of the clearest clues concern the physical demands of survival. Cetacean genomes contain changes in gene families involved in inflammation and tissue repair, and comparative studies have identified episodes of accelerated evolution in pathways associated with healing. Such patterns cannot be assigned to predation alone because genes often serve many functions, yet they fit an ocean in which injuries, exertion, and recovery repeatedly influenced which animals survived long enough to reproduce. The molecular record also reaches into the lungs, muscles, and blood. Sperm whales possess extraordinary stores of oxygen in their bodies, supported by abundant myoglobin in their muscles, and specialized physiology for prolonged diving. Their genomes preserve changes associated with this system, linking molecular evolution to the anatomical adaptations visible in skulls and other fossil remains. A deep dive is therefore recorded twice, once in the structure of the animal and again in the biological instructions that helped build that structure. Orcas reveal another dimension. Their lives depend heavily on cooperation, communication, memory, and learned hunting behavior. Comparative genomic research has found signals of accelerated evolution in genes associated with brain function and social behavior across cetacean lineages. Although individual genes cannot be assigned to hunting alone, the pattern matters because a predator that coordinates with companions faces a different evolutionary landscape from one that relies almost entirely on solitary speed or strength. Sharks carry their own molecular history. Genes involved in sensory processing, immune regulation, metabolism, and tissue maintenance have evolved under pressures that differ from those experienced by whales. Yet, the timing of some changes overlaps major periods of cetacean diversification. At this scale, the rivalry becomes less like a sequence of battles and more like two branching histories continually responding to the same changing ocean. One especially revealing area concerns the problem of becoming large. Bigger bodies require stronger cardiovascular systems, greater control over cellular damage, and mechanisms that reduce the risks associated with rapid growth and prolonged physical exertion. Studies of cetacean genomes have identified evolutionary changes in pathways connected with deoxyribonucleic acid repair, tumor suppression, and cardiovascular function. These adaptations are especially interesting in animals that achieved extraordinary body size while maintaining long lives, intense metabolism, and repeated episodes of physical stress. The molecular evidence does not provide a simple ledger in which every genetic change can be labeled as a response to a particular predator. Evolution is rarely so tidy. Climate, diet, disease, reproduction, migration, and social life all leave overlapping signatures. What makes the genome valuable is the way those signatures can be compared with fossils, anatomy, ecology, and behavior. When several independent records point toward the same broad period of change, the history becomes easier to reconstruct. At the smallest scale, the alphabet is remarkably simple. Adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine are arranged in sequences that carry instructions for building and maintaining living bodies. Across millions of years, tiny changes accumulated in those sequences, some disappearing, some spreading, and others becoming part of the ordinary biology of descendants. A tooth can preserve the shape of a bite. A bone can preserve the consequence of an injury. A genome preserves something subtler, the accumulated biological adjustments that remained after countless generations had passed. In whales and sharks, that molecular archive still travels through the ocean inside every living body, carrying fragments of an ancient contest into the present. Long before marine biology gave the ocean its modern vocabulary, people were already giving names to the animals that shaped their lives at sea. A shark was not simply a fish. A whale was not simply a mammal. Their behavior, appearance, movements, and encounters became part of stories through which communities remembered the character of the waters around them. In Hawaiian traditions, Kamohoali appears as a powerful shark deity associated with the sea and with protection, transformation, and danger. The figure does not map neatly onto modern zoology, nor should mythology be treated as a literal field report. Yet the presence of sharks within a broader, sacred geography reflects something fundamental about island life, where large marine predators were familiar inhabitants of the same waters used for travel, fishing, and gathering. Farther north, among Tlingit and Haida peoples of the Pacific Northwest, killer whales occupy an especially elevated place within traditional knowledge and cosmology. Their presence is tied to power, ancestry, social relationships, and the ocean itself. Such traditions emerged within coastal environments where people could observe orcas repeatedly across generations, learning their seasonal movements, group structures, hunting behavior, and relationships with other animals. A creature that returned year after year, traveled in coordinated groups, and could dominate large prey naturally became more than an entry in an imagined bestiary. The North Atlantic produced its own language for immense creatures beyond the reach of ordinary human experience. Medieval Norse literature describes beings such as the Hafgufa, a vast sea creature associated with sailors' accounts of enormous marine life. The kraken belongs to a later and more complicated tradition, gradually becoming associated with a gigantic sea monster. These stories cannot be used as evidence that ancient people witnessed a literal prehistoric predator. They do, however, show how repeated encounters with unfamiliar marine animals could become enlarged through storytelling as knowledge passed from one generation to another. Across distant coastlines, the details change, but the underlying process remains recognizable. Humans watched the sea because survival depended upon it. They noticed where whales appeared, where sharks gathered, when certain animals arrived, and how predators behaved around fishing grounds or near the shore. A dangerous animal did not need to be understood through anatomy or evolutionary history to become part of practical knowledge. Its presence was enough to shape memory. Storytelling provided a remarkably durable way to preserve that memory. A written scientific description can disappear when a library burns or a record is lost. A story repeated beside a fire, during a voyage, or within a family can remain alive because each generation has a reason to remember it. Details may change, meanings may deepen, animals may become supernatural, yet fragments of environmental knowledge can remain embedded inside the narrative. This does not mean mythology should be treated as scientific evidence in the modern sense. A sacred story cannot establish the former range of a shark, prove a particular predation event, or provide a reliable measurement of an extinct animal. Its value lies elsewhere, in revealing what people repeatedly noticed about the living world around them. The ocean entered human memory through animals large enough to reshape the imagination. Whales became symbols of abundance, power, ancestry, and distance. Sharks became associated with danger, guardianship, transformation, and the uncertain boundary between human waters and the deeper sea. Orcas, with their social bonds and coordinated behavior, could occupy an especially distinctive place in coastal traditions. In that sense, mythology becomes a different kind of ecological archive. It is imperfect, layered, and transformed by generations of retelling, yet beneath the symbolism lies an enduring human habit: watching the ocean closely enough to recognize that its largest predators were not merely creatures passing through it. They were forces that shaped where people traveled, what they remembered, and which pieces of the living sea were considered too important to let disappear. For most of the rivalry's history, change arrived at the pace of geology. Oceans shifted, coastlines moved, climates warmed and cooled, and species disappeared over spans long enough for evolution to respond. Human activity changed that rhythm. Within a small fraction of geological time, the same ocean that had shaped whales and sharks for millions of years was transformed by a new predator whose reach extended across every coastline. During the 20th century, industrial whaling removed millions of large whales from the sea. Blue whales, fin whales, humpback whales, and sperm whales were pursued across entire ocean basins, reducing populations that had once numbered in the hundreds of thousands or more. Some blue whale populations fell to only a small fraction of their former abundance. The effect reached beyond the animals themselves. Removing so many enormous bodies altered feeding systems, nutrient transport, migration patterns, and the availability of prey for other predators. The change was especially unusual because the pressure came from outside the ecological contest. A whale no longer needed to survive a shark attack, evade an orca, or reach a safe calving ground to escape a predator. It also had to avoid ships, fishing gear, and deliberate hunting. Natural selection had spent tens of millions of years shaping bodies around biological threats, yet human technology introduced dangers operating at a different scale and speed. Sharks experienced their own transformation. Commercial fisheries, targeted catches, bycatch, and the international demand for shark fins removed tens of millions of sharks from the ocean each year, with some estimates reaching roughly 100 million individuals annually. The losses were not confined to the largest predators. Species occupying many different habitats were removed together, thinning an entire branch of the marine food web. For the rivalry itself, this created an unusual imbalance. Fewer large whales meant fewer opportunities for predators that depended upon them. Fewer sharks meant fewer encounters between sharks and whale calves. Even the selective pressures that had once shaped the two lineages began to change. A trait that had been valuable for surviving predation might become less important when the predator responsible for that pressure became scarce. The consequences extend into the ocean's chemistry and climate. Human activity has warmed the ocean substantially, while changing currents, oxygen conditions, sea ice, and the distribution of prey. Recent measurements show that ocean heat content continues to rise, with the upper ocean reaching record levels in recent years. The direction of change matters because whales and sharks do not experience temperature as an abstract number. It determines where prey gathers, where breeding grounds remain suitable, and how much energy an animal must spend moving through its environment. There is a strange symmetry in this disruption. Millions of years ago, cooling helped remove a giant predator by shrinking the warm habitats it depended upon. Now, warming is altering marine ecosystems through an entirely different mechanism. Neither change was designed for the animals caught within it, yet both demonstrate how closely predators and prey remain tied to the physical character of the sea. The ancient rivalry was built through countless generations of adaptation. Teeth sharpened against flesh, bodies grew larger, muscles became more powerful, senses became more refined. Social behavior became more complex. Each adjustment belonged to an ocean that changed gradually enough for life to respond. Human influence has compressed that process into a remarkably short interval. The whales and sharks alive today still carry the inheritance of that ancient contest, but they are living under conditions that their ancestors never encountered. The rivalry continues, yet the rules surrounding it are no longer being written by predators and prey alone. 50 million years of conflict left no monument. Its accounting is written instead in living bodies, each carrying a different answer to the pressures imposed by predators, prey, climate, distance, and depth. The result is not a single winner, but an ocean filled with forms that could scarcely have existed without the long interaction between hunting and escape. The blue whale represents the clearest measure of that escalation. Growing to about 30 meters, roughly 98 feet, and weighing around 180 tons, about 200 tons, it became the largest animal known to have lived. At that scale, further increases bring enormous costs. A larger body requires more food, greater energy reserves, and immense amounts of time to mature. Size became both armor and burden, carrying the rivalry toward a biological ceiling where sheer mass offered protection that speed alone could no longer provide. The sperm whale answered a different part of the problem by moving into a realm where the surface hunters were less effective. Descents beyond 2,000 meters, about 6,600 feet, carry it into darkness and crushing pressure. Its blood, muscles, and lungs are adapted for prolonged submergence, while its clicking sounds allow it to construct an acoustic picture of surroundings that its eyes cannot reveal. The animal does not merely flee into depth, it has transformed depth into habitat. Elsewhere, intelligence became another form of defense and offense. Orcas live within social groups where hunting techniques can be learned, practiced, modified, and passed between generations. Different communities specialize in different prey and develop traditions that can persist for decades. Such behavior makes knowledge itself part of the body's survival equipment. A young orca does not inherit every hunting method through anatomy alone. It can acquire strategies through observation and participation, allowing a population to respond to local conditions with a flexibility that physical evolution alone could not provide. Sharks carry their own accumulation of solutions. Electroreceptive organs can detect extraordinarily weak electrical fields produced by living tissue. Their lateral line systems register disturbances moving through surrounding water, while highly sensitive smell guides them toward chemical traces released by injured animals. These senses allow a predator to assemble information from several physical properties of the ocean, finding biological signals where vision has little use. The whales answered through movement, memory, and sound. Gray whales travel thousands of miles between feeding and breeding regions, while humpback populations maintain migratory traditions that can persist across generations. Calving locations are not random points on a map. Their timing, geography, and accessibility to predators become part of inherited behavioral knowledge. Songs carry another layer of information, with vocal patterns changing within populations and spreading between neighboring groups over time. Together, these traits reveal an arms race that never produced a single weapon. It produced scale, endurance, sensory precision, social learning, migration, and communication. Each emerged within a different branch of the same immense ecological conversation, shaped by countless encounters whose details disappeared long before humans could record them. Nothing in this process was planned. Natural selection does not know the destination of a lineage, and neither whale nor shark could perceive the millions of generations connecting one adaptation to another. Yet the accumulated result is visible everywhere in the modern ocean. The largest bodies, the deepest dives, the most refined senses, the longest journeys, and the richest social traditions all carry traces of pressures that once began as simple encounters between hunter and hunted. The rivalry built no monument because it did not need one. Its record moves through muscle, bone, nerve, instinct, memory, and learned behavior, carried onward each time a whale crosses an old route or a shark follows an electrical trace through the water. A fossil can preserve a wound, but it cannot preserve the moment before the wound was made. That boundary follows every specimen we have recovered from the ancient ocean. Rock can hold the outline of a tooth, the healed surface of bone, or the shape of a vertebra, yet the living sequence around those objects has almost always disappeared. The fossil record is therefore not a complete history of the rivalry, but a collection of rare survivors from a much larger world. Preservation itself favors certain places and certain bodies. Shallow marine sediments are more likely to bury remains than deep ocean floors, while dense teeth and sturdy bones endure processes that erase softer tissues. A large whale that died far offshore could sink through hundreds or thousands of meters, about hundreds or thousands of feet, before reaching the seafloor, where scavengers, currents, and chemistry might dismantle it before burial ever began. Another animal might decay near a coastline and vanish without leaving even a fragment behind. Geography edits the past before paleontologists ever have the opportunity to read it. The same limitation follows Megalodon's teeth. Their mineralized structure makes them unusually durable, which is why thousands have survived while almost every other part of the animal has vanished. Yet each tooth represents only a small piece of a much larger life. An individual shark could have hunted for decades, encountered countless whales, missed many attacks, abandoned others, and killed prey whose remains were never preserved. None of those events needed to leave a mark in rock. Even the wounds that do survive remain incomplete. A healed groove across a whale rib can establish that an attack occurred and that the animal lived long enough for bone to repair itself. It cannot reveal the precise movement that produced the injury, the number of animals involved, or the behavior of the whale immediately afterward. Somewhere beyond the specimen lies an entire sequence of perception and response that calcium cannot remember. The Miocene Ocean also had an acoustic dimension that fossils cannot restore. Whale calls traveled through water, predators approached through pressure and movement, and social groups responded to disturbances that may have spread across enormous distances. A pod encountering a large shark could have changed direction, tightened its formation, moved calves toward adults, or scattered into deeper water. Such actions may have been repeated across generations, yet no sedimentary layer can preserve the decisions made within those fleeting moments. The surviving rib in an Italian museum carries another kind of uncertainty. Its healed damage tells us that one whale endured an encounter that might otherwise have vanished completely. The animal then returned to the same ocean, carrying repaired bone inside its body. It may have altered its movements, responded differently to predators, or passed experience through learned behavior to younger members of its group. None of that can be recovered from the grooves themselves. This limitation does not make the fossil record useless. It makes every conclusion proportional to the evidence. A preserved bite is not the whole story of predation. A collection of teeth is not the population that produced them. A healed injury is not the memory of the animal that survived it. Absence must be treated as evidence with limits. Most of the rivalry left no fossils at all. The majority existed as brief encounters, successful escapes, unsuccessful hunts, migrations, injuries, recoveries, births, and deaths that dissolved back into the ocean. What remains is precious precisely because it is incomplete, a narrow surviving thread through an immeasurably larger fabric of lives that once unfolded beyond our reach. Every blue whale alive tonight carries an ancient history in its body, not as a memory it can describe, but as a collection of traits inherited through countless generations. Somewhere between feeding grounds and breeding waters, every living giant represents the accumulated result of selection acting on bodies that had to survive in an ocean where enormous predators once moved through the same pathways. The scale of the blue whale is perhaps the clearest expression of that history. Reaching about 30 meters, roughly 98 feet, it occupies a physical boundary. Few predators can challenge directly. Such size demands extraordinary quantities of food and energy, yet it also changes the economics of attack. A very large adult becomes difficult to overpower, difficult to restrain, and increasingly costly for a predator to pursue. The body, therefore, carries a compromise written by evolution, immense enough to reduce vulnerability while remaining capable of supporting itself through an ocean of seasonal food. Its movements carry another inheritance. Migration is not simply a response to temperature or the presence of prey. Routes, timing, and seasonal destinations can be transmitted socially, allowing young whales to acquire patterns of movement through association with experienced animals. A journey repeated across generations becomes a kind of living geography, preserved not on a map but in behavior. The ocean may change around the route, yet the knowledge of where to feed, where to breed, and when to move can persist within the population. Sound adds another layer to that inheritance. Whale calls can travel across immense distances, carrying information through water long after the animal that produced them has moved beyond sight. In humpback whales, songs can change through cultural transmission, with new patterns spreading between populations over time. Communication is therefore not fixed like a bone. It can be learned, altered, and passed onward, allowing social knowledge to remain flexible while still accumulating across generations. The sperm whale embodies a different response to the same ancient pressure. Its massive head houses specialized structures involved in producing and directing powerful clicks, while its muscles contain extraordinary concentrations of myoglobin that support prolonged diving. Descents reaching about 2,000 meters, roughly 6,600 feet, place the animal in a realm where surface predators have far less influence. A body built for depth transforms physical separation into protection. Then there is the orca, whose inheritance is partly social. Individuals remain connected within stable groups, recognizing companions and learning techniques through repeated interaction. Hunting methods can become traditions, preserved within a community and modified as circumstances change. The result is a predator whose most important equipment cannot be measured only in teeth, muscle, or speed. Knowledge itself becomes part of the ecological machinery. Across these animals, the rivalry is therefore present in different forms. It appears in mass, in migration, in sound, in diving physiology, and in social learning. None of these traits was designed for a purpose. Each accumulated because certain bodies survived long enough to reproduce more successfully than others, leaving their particular variations in the generations that followed. The animals alive tonight cannot look backward across geological time. A whale does not carry a story of ancient sharks in the way a human carries a written memory. Yet, its body contains consequences of environments that shaped its ancestors, while its learned behavior carries information gathered by generations before it was born. That is what remains of the ancient rivalry in the present ocean. Not a monument, not a preserved scene, but living inheritance, moving through water in bodies that still bear the shape of pressures imposed long before humanity existed. Predation is easy to understand as subtraction. One animal catches another, and something is lost. Yet, across deep time, the subtraction becomes a strange source of addition, because every generation that survives an ecological challenge leaves behind bodies better suited to meeting it. The rivalry between whales and sharks shows this process without needing to assign intention to either side. No animal knew the shape of the future. Each simply carried the consequences of surviving long enough to reproduce. Consider what happened when size became useful. A larger whale could be harder to overpower, but greater mass also demanded greater energy and more efficient feeding. Over immense spans of time, those competing demands produced bodies whose proportions seem almost improbable by human standards. The blue whale, reaching about 30 meters, roughly 98 feet, is not merely large. Its entire physiology has been reorganized around sustaining that scale, from circulation to feeding to the movement of enormous quantities of blood and oxygen through living tissue. Size became a biological language spoken in response to a world where being difficult to kill had value. Depth offered another answer. The sperm whale developed a body capable of descending to about 2,000 meters, roughly 6,600 feet, where pressure rises dramatically and sunlight disappears. Its oxygen stores, blood chemistry, muscle tissue, and cardiovascular regulation allow it to remain submerged for prolonged periods. Down there, the advantages of surface pursuit change. Depth is no longer simply distance from danger. It becomes a different ecological space, reached through physiology refined over generations. Intelligence became another form of adaptation. Orcas can learn specialized hunting techniques, coordinate movements, recognize individuals, and preserve behaviors through social teaching. Such abilities are difficult to reduce to a single anatomical feature because the adaptation exists partly between individuals. A hunting tradition can outlive the animal that learned it, passing through a community as accumulated knowledge. In that sense, selection did not shape only bodies. It helped create societies capable of storing useful information. Sharks followed their own paths. Their electroreceptive organs detect faint electrical fields, Their lateral line systems register movement through surrounding water, and their chemical senses can locate biological traces over distance. These systems do not resemble the social intelligence of an orca, yet they solve related problems. When prey becomes difficult to see, difficult to approach, or difficult to track, a predator benefits from discovering information that ordinary vision cannot provide. The result is not a ladder of progress, with one lineage simply becoming better than another. It is a branching landscape of solutions. One animal becomes enormous, another becomes capable of extraordinary dives, another relies on inherited knowledge, another reads electrical signals moving through seawater. Each pathway carries costs as well as benefits, because every adaptation exists inside limits imposed by energy, anatomy, reproduction, and the environment. That is why the living ocean contains such unusual forms. Pressure accumulated slowly, generation after generation, until small advantages became defining characteristics. A body that survived one kind of encounter contributed descendants to a population. A behavior that improved hunting or avoidance could spread through learning. Over geological time, these small differences became architecture. The beauty of the result does not require the rivalry to have been gentle. It comes from the precision of the solutions. Every massive body, deep descent, sensory system, migration, and learned behavior represents countless moments in which life met a constraint and continued. Conflict was never a conscious architect. Yet through natural selection, it became an engine of form, turning pressure into structure and survival into inheritance, until the ocean produced animals whose complexity still carries the shape of an ancient struggle. Somewhere beneath the broad Pacific sky, a gray whale calf is making its first great journey between feeding and breeding grounds, following a route that existed before the calf itself was born. Its body is less than a year old, yet the path beneath it belongs to generations. Each turn of the coastline, each season of departure, and each return toward familiar waters represents behavior preserved through repeated survival, carried forward not in written records, but through the actions of living whales. Far away, along the coast of South Africa, another part of the old relationship has been rearranged. Great white sharks once occupied these waters as dominant predators, but the arrival of orcas has altered their distribution. Researchers have documented individual orcas whose hunting behavior is associated with the disappearance of great white sharks from particular areas. The change reaches beyond a single encounter. When one apex predator consistently avoids a region because another predator has become dangerous there, the movement of an entire ecosystem can begin to shift. Elsewhere, a blue whale moves through water whose physical conditions are changing within the span of a human lifetime. The ocean is warmer than it was before large-scale industrialization, and its chemistry, currents, prey distributions, and seasonal patterns are changing alongside it. Within that moving environment, the whale continues to produce some of the most powerful biological sounds known, sending low-frequency calls across immense distances through seawater. A single voice can become part of an acoustic landscape extending far beyond the range of any human listener. Nothing about these animals suggests that they know the geological history written into their bodies. The gray whale does not carry a map of ancient migrations. The great white shark does not understand the ecological consequences of an orca entering its former range. The blue whale does not measure the changing temperature of the sea. Each animal simply lives within the conditions available to it, responding through inherited anatomy, learned behavior, instinct, memory, and social experience. Yet together, Their lives reveal something continuous. More than 50 million years ago, one lineage of land dwelling mammals began moving toward an existence in water already inhabited by sharks. The descendants of those early animals gradually changed their limbs, bodies, breathing systems, hearing, feeding strategies, and social behavior until they became whales. Sharks changed as well, refining senses and hunting systems that allowed them to remain effective among increasingly capable marine mammals. Neither lineage followed a predetermined path. Their histories emerged through countless interactions between bodies and environments, predators and prey, opportunity and constraint. The fossils scattered through museum collections preserve fragments of that process. Teeth mark vanished predators. Bones preserve injuries. Sediments record ancient seas. But the living ocean contains the continuation that fossils cannot preserve. A whale still crosses an inherited route. An orca still teaches a hunting technique. A shark still detects electrical signals produced by another animal's muscles. These actions occur without leaving a permanent mark in stone, yet they belong to the same biological history. Tonight, the rivalry is not finished. It has no final victor waiting at the end of geological time. Its participants are still adapting to one another, still responding to changes in prey, predators, temperature, currents, and habitat. The ancient relationship survives because the ocean itself keeps changing around it. And beneath the surface, somewhere beyond the reach of human eyes, a living whale continues through the water, while a living shark searches nearby, each carrying an inheritance assembled across ages, each adding another moment to a story that began long before humanity had a name for the sea.